science is essential. Everywhere, all the time, science boosts your potential. Knowledge equals power. Don't waste another hour. You can do it. Anywhere, anytime. Hi, I'm Sandy Shores with WKEG, where we know the Everglades. Today we will be exploring the wild side of the Everglades. Let's start with Kirk Kissimmee, our news team authority on the geography and history of the Everglades. Welcome, Kirk.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm thrilled to be here today to help all of you understand the wonderful world of the Everglades. The Florida Everglades ecosystem encompasses South Florida from the Kissimmee Valley, close to a world-famous mouse house, down to the Everglades National Park. This is referred to as the KOE system. The Everglades was originally a very large watershed, flowing at only 1/48th of a mile per hour southwest to a 70-mile wide mouth at Florida Bay opening into the Gulf of Mexico. Because of the slow-moving water and its vegetation, it's often called the River of Grass. As a part of the KOE system, the Kissimmee flows south into Lake Okeechobee, America's second largest lake, then into the Everglades. The southwestern part of the Everglades is the Big Cypress National Preserve. Southern Florida is a natural flood zone, which is said to have two seasons, wet and dry. Originally, the Everglades landscape was meant to receive the water that flows from summer storms and hurricanes. The Everglades ecosystem today is about half the size that it was before human impact. An ecosystem is a natural unit of living and non-living things that interact or affect one another. Air, sunlight, water, rocks, and soil are all non-living things that are an important part of an ecosystem. Living things in the Everglades include fish, frogs, snakes, alligators, birds, and many other animals and plants. Most of the 6.5 million people living in central and southern Florida are living on lands that were once part of the Everglades. Although humans have made changes to the Everglades and the flow of its water, natural habitats can still be observed. The place where a species lives is called a habitat. Every habitat that exists in South Florida can be found in the Everglades, including freshwater marshes, dry prairies, pine lands, hardwood hammocks, cypress swamps, sloughs, mangrove swamps, and coastal marshes. Different factors determine what plant and animal populations live in each habitat. A population is a group of one species that lives in a particular area. All the populations that share a particular area form a community. Changes in one population can affect the other populations within a habitat due to interdependence. This has been Kirk Kissimmee with a bit of geography and history of the Everglades. Back to you, Sandy.
Thanks, Kirk. It is fascinating to hear exactly how fragile and ever-changing the Everglades are. Now, let's turn to our star WKEG news team, bringing you the most up-to-the-minute information on the habitats of the Everglades. Waiting on location, we have Marsha Grasswater to tell us about one of the most important habitats in the Everglades.
Marsha Grasswater here today with my fellow reporters visiting the many habitats of the Everglades. As you can see, I am in the freshwater marsh. One type of marsh is a shallow wetland containing standing water for most of the year. It is often called the sawgrass marsh, since the sawgrass plant lives here. This plant is named for the sharp teeth that line its blades. Some habitats have clearly defined boundaries between them, which means you can see where one ends and the other begins.
Hi, I'm Sunny Cypress here in the Hardwood Hammocks habitat. Hardwood hammocks are made up of limestone outcrops on which tropical plants and trees grow. Many wildlife populations call this habitat home, including deer, raccoons, bobcats, barred owls, hawks, marsh rabbits, water moccasins, Vigus tree snails, also known as the Florida tree snail, and American alligators.
Another Everglades habitat is the pinelands. This habitat is located mostly in the eastern Everglades and also on Long Pine Key. The slash pine, saw palmetto, moonvine, and kuti all grow in this habitat. The animals that find their food and shelter within the pinelands include cotton mice, possums, raccoon, pine warblers, reef geckos, Florida panthers, Florida bear, and key deer.
Mangrove swamp is a habitat that extends from the southern end of the national park and along the Florida Bay. It includes 3 species of mangrove trees and brackish water. Mangroves do amazing things.
It's actually an estuary that has both salt water and fresh water moving into it. And as a result of that, they serve as a neat place for animals to find cover and to hide in possibly. That's where you'll find a lot of fish. Maybe you'll find some of the marine fish and some of the marine animals moving into these mangrove areas and possibly laying their eggs. This area is called an incubator. Okay. So the mangroves are considered the incubators of the seas, where some of the animals will come in, the fish. You've got different kinds of crabs that come in. So many different beautiful birds that come in. They're secluded. They're covered by the 3 different kinds of mangroves: the red and white and black, which are all interesting and they have distinctive features. Each type has a different shape of leaf, and some of them actually have different root systems and different ways of planting their seeds and so forth.
It has been estimated that over 50% of our marine species depend on the mangroves at some point in their life cycle. Back to you, Sandy.
Thank you, team, for that very interesting report on the habitats of the Everglades. Let's review some of the habitats we learned about. The freshwater marsh, hardwood hammocks, the pinelands, and the mangrove swamp. Name the different habitats in the Everglades. Now that we've explored the ecosystems in the Everglades, let's take a deeper look inside an ecosystem and see how we can classify organisms based upon how they get energy. To do this, let's check back with Kurt Kissimmee.
Kurt Kissimmee with some essential information about how organisms get energy. Let's start with the sun. The sun is an important part of life on Earth, providing warmth and light. And, as you may already know, it is an energy source for many forms of life, including plants. Plants get energy from the sun to make their own food. The fact that they make their own food classifies them as primary producers. The plant uses the sun's light to transform carbon dioxide into sugar. The plant then stores the sugar as energy in order to grow. We call this process photosynthesis.
Animals and humans also need energy to move and grow. Animals are classified as consumers because they cannot make their own food like a plant. They actually receive energy from the plants and animals they eat. Animals are not only classified as consumers, but also by the type of food they consume. Animals that only eat plants are called herbivores. Animals that only eat meat are called carnivores. Animals that eat both plants and meat are called omnivores. That would include many humans. We eat fruits and vegetables as well as meat. A fourth category of consumers is called decomposers. They consume decomposing organic material, or organisms that are already dead or decaying. Fungus, such as mushrooms, receive nutrients from decomposing organic material, such as dead trees and leaves.
There is also another way of classifying organisms. They can either be considered a specialist or a generalist. A specialist eats only one type of food, like a snail kite, which eats only apple snails. A generalist eats a wide variety of food. An example of a generalist would be an American alligator. This has been Bird Mangrove. Now back to you, Sandy.
Well, that certainly was interesting and informative. Let's quickly recap all the interesting things we learned about. Producers, consumers, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, specialists, and generalists. Are producers and herbivores the same? Are consumers and carnivores the same? Are all plants producers and all animals consumers? Now that we've become familiar with the terms producers, consumers, and decomposers, it It is time to discover the fabulous world of food webs. Here to help us with this is Marcia Grasswater.
Happy to help, Sandy. First, let us recognize the fact that the food chain shows the path of food from one animal to another. For instance, fish eat algae. Then the raccoon eats the fish. Food chains are oversimplified because there are many other factors to consider, like the fact that the algae needed the sun's warmth and light, along with fresh water in order to grow. Food webs show all the factors in an ecosystem in order for plants and animals to survive.
As we have learned, there are a variety of habitats found in the Everglades. Each food web begins with energy from the sun and expands from there. Here is an Everglades food web. Notice the direction of the energy movement. Changes in any one of these populations can affect the others. Absence of one could be a sign of reduced populations of another.
Now, it may surprise you, but natural fire is also a very important component to the Everglades. It is essential to the health and stability of the ecosystems. Fire clears the underlying brush and allows sunlight to get to the seedlings in order for them to grow. Without fire, these seedlings would never get the sunlight they need. There are actually plants that require fire at some point during their life cycle. They are called fire dependent. How would the elimination or disease of one species affect the rest of the food web? Throughout history, people have tried to manage wetlands. Each time has had a significant impact on the delicate natural balance of cycles within these ecosystems. The Everglades are not found anywhere else in the world except Florida. These unique wetlands have been threatened by habitat loss, pollution, and water flow changes. Most of the 6.5 million people living in central and southern Florida are living on lands that were once part of the Everglades. Today, the Everglades is only about half the size it once was. Long ago, people began training the wetlands and filling them with soil, so they can be developed for farming as well as commercial and residential areas. In the 1940s, there was a great demand for overflow control because of the frequent flooding from heavy rains and hurricanes. So in 1948, the Army Corps of Engineers was brought in to find some kind of solution to this problem. The result was an elaborate water management infrastructure. But unfortunately, this solution had a huge impact on the aquatic ecosystem that relied on this pattern of water flow for the past 5,000 years. As you travel around Florida, you may also notice dikes, dams, and canals that people have built over the years to change the path of water flow in order to supply sufficient amounts of water for these areas. You may be asking yourself, what happens when wetlands dry up? Let's see what Bert Mangroves has to tell us about that.
Well, whenever they dry up or become altered, a negative chain reaction starts. For example, the lack of water could cause crayfish to disappear, which would cause raccoons and other animals that eat crayfish to suffer or even starve to death because their food source would be gone. This would cause a domino effect where the disappearance or collapse of one species causes the collapse of many others. Think about how devastating this would be if this happened to specialists like the snail kite, which only has one food source.
As we mentioned before, there are other problems harming the Everglades. Let's turn to Kirk Kissimmee to find out what they are.
Pollution is also a problem for the Everglades because it can be harmful to plants, animals, and humans. Another problem is pests and pest control. Pests are organisms humans think of as harmful or unwanted because some spread disease, while others destroy agricultural crops. Chemicals have been used to control these unwanted pests, which has been proven to be very harmful to the delicate balance of the Everglades. Back to you, Sandy.
Now that the damage to the Everglades is finally being recognized, the new priority is restoration. Restoration means that we want to reestablish the wetlands, revitalize water quality, and revive the habitats of nearly 60 endangered and threatened species.
As of now, many projects and initiatives have been implemented to balance water supply needs for consumers, agriculture, and the needs of the environment. What type of human activities impact the Everglades? This has been Sandy Shores with WKEG, where we know the Everglades. Stay tuned for everybody's favorite show, Everything Everglades. And remember, anytime, anywhere, science is everywhere.
Hello everybody and welcome to Everything Everglades. I'm Slash Pineland with the always exciting show Everything Everglades, where knowing everything about the Everglades can help you and your friends know you know everything about the Everglades. Okay, let's begin. First question. The Florida Everglades ecosystem encompasses South Florida from where to where? If you guess from the Kissimmee Valley to the Everglades National Park, you're really treading water now. Next question. Because of its slow-moving water and vegetation, the Everglades is often called A, river of molasses, B, snail trail, C, river of grass, or D, slow water. The answer is C. The Everglades is often called the river of grass because of its slow-moving water and vegetation. True or false? The Everglades today is only about half its original size due to human impact. That's true! You really know your Everglades facts. Keep up the good work. Ooh, moving on to a few definitions. The place where a species lived is called... Did you get it? It's called a habitat, but you knew that. Now for a tough one. What is the definition of interdependence? You got it! Interdependence is how plants and animals interact and affect one another in their environment. I'm really impressed with you. Okay, here is the picture question of the day. Label the 4 habitats in the following pictures. Let's check it out. You should have labeled picture 1, my personal favorite, pinelands. Picture 2, freshwater marsh. Picture 3, hardwood hammocks. And picture 4, mangrove swamp. How'd you do? Did you get them all? Animals that eat both plants and meat are A, herbivores, B, omnivores, C, carnivores, or D, pledivores. I bet you knew that one. The answer is B. Animals that eat both plants and meat are omnivores. Ooh, another true or false question. An example of a specialist is an American alligator. Did we stump you on that one? It's false. An American alligator is an example of a generalist because it eats a wide variety of foods. Here's a fill in the blank. Each food web begins with... Did you say energy from the sun? If you did, you are doing a remarkable job. Oh, there's the final question buzzer. Here is our final question of the day. Name 3 things that have threatened the Everglades. I'll bet you said habitat loss, pollution, and water flow changes. And that just proves you know everything about the Everglades. Congratulations, you did a great job. Give yourself a pat on the back. This has been Slash Pineland with Everything Everglades. See you around, and remember, anytime, anywhere, science is everywhere.
Activity 1. Ecosystem Writing Prompt. Purpose. Students will research habitats of the Everglades to learn about the different inhabitants of each. Time, 35 to 45 minutes. Materials, paper and pencil. What to do? Have students read the Habitat Introduction Reading Exercise. Set up a writing prompt for the students. Prompt students into a short story revolving around a habitat of their choice in the Everglades. Questions to think about. Which habitat would you like to live in if you were an animal, and why? What kind of animal would you choose to be, and why? Describe the habitat you would live in. What do the trees look like? What types of flora are found there? What are some of the animals amongst you in that area? After all the questions are thought about and answered, the students could then start to compile a short story. Whether it be about a friendly water moccasin getting lost in the terrain or a mean panther looking for food, the essay should be creative and reflect the Everglades. Habitat Introduction. What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a natural unit of living and non-living things that interact or affect one another, such as people, plants, animals, and microorganism communities. The place where a species lives is called a habitat. It provides plants and animals with all their needs. Every habitat that exists in South Florida can be found in the Everglades, including freshwater marshes, dry prairies, pinelands, hardwood hammocks, cypress swamps, sloughs, mangrove swamps, coastal marshes, and also disturbed habitats. Each of these habitats conveys distinct characteristics of nature. Each habitat is naturally and uniquely designed to be called home for many beautiful animals and plants. Let's learn a little bit more about our very own Florida Everglades and its habitats. Hardwood hammocks tend to be shaded by dense, vine-entangled forest and abundant broadleaf vegetation. They stay moist and well protected from fire because they grow on natural rises, only a few inches off the ground, and their elevation is above annual flooding level. This type of habitat can be found all over the Everglades ecosystem, mainly in deeper and murkier sloughs and marshes. The flow of water causes the hammocks to form tree islands with characteristic teardrop shapes. Mangroves are found in the coastal channels and winding rivers at the tip of South Florida. The term mangrove is used to identify many species of salt-tolerant trees that live among the ever-changing, harsh-growing conditions and tides of coastal areas. The three dominant species found along Florida's coast are the red, black, and white mangroves. The red mangrove, found closest to the ocean shore, is distinguished by its tangled, stilt-like prop roots, which give it the appearance of walking. The name red mangrove comes from the maroon tint to the tree, which lies under the grayish bark. Black mangroves grow more toward land than the red mangroves. They're called black mangroves because the mature tree has blackish-looking bark. White mangroves have the lightest bark and grow closest to land than the other mangroves. Mangroves thrive in brackish waters, which is a mix of fresh and salt water. The mangrove habitat is one of the most fascinating of Florida's ecosystems because of their ability to thrive in salt water by blocking the absorption of salt and by obtaining fresh water. The significance of mangroves is that they capture soil and build up land, serve as a protected nursery for juvenile marine creatures, a wide range of fish species, crustaceans, and shellfish, and shelter numerous bird species. During the summer months, these mangrove forests provide the first line of defense against the howling winds and storm surge of hurricanes. Now we will study the pinelands, otherwise known as the pine rocklands. The pine rockland habitat is aptly named as it is only found on limestone substrate and has only one canopy tree species, the slash pine. Examining this habitat from top to bottom, the Florida slash pine is the tallest tree encountered. Then cabbage palms, saw palmettos, silver palms, and willows, with a shrubbery understory of velvet seed, varnish leaf, broomgrass, and locust berry, followed by a thick herbaceous layer. Numerous hardwoods are also present. Because these types of habitats are rocky in nature, water is not retained as long as in other, more absorbent substrates. Another important aspect of this community is the adaptation to seasonal wildfires. These wildfires are a regular part of the ecosystem cycle, and most of the pineland habitat plants are fire adapted. Slash pines have adapted to these events by having relatively thick bark. Fires help to diminish overgrowth and dead vegetation, which results in more open soil areas and more sunlight for understory plants. These changes provide better conditions for new pine seedlings and seedlings of other plants to grow. Next, we have the coastal lowlands, which are located between the tidal mudflats of Florida Bay and dry land. The coastal lowlands are a mixture of bushy and salt-tolerant vegetation. These areas do not have mangroves to help for protection. Unfortunately, this leads to periodic flooding by hurricanes and their heavy winds. Typically located between tidal mudflats and dry land, coastal prairie habitat can be flooded by hurricane waves and pummeled by intense winds. Hurricanes sweep seawater onto the Florida coast, and once the water evaporates, the soil is left highly saline, resulting in the forest being destroyed and the coastal prairie being formed. Because of this unnaturally high salt concentration, the dominant plants that are most able to tolerate these harsh conditions and are characteristic to this habitat are saltwort and glasswort. Animal species diversity is relatively low in coastal prairies due to the severe surroundings and the lack of shelter. Species of butterflies, mosquitoes, and marsh rabbits are some of the only animals that live in this habitat. Many species of birds use dead trees as a site in which to eat a meal that may have been caught nearby. Fresh water sloughs are low-lying areas of land that serve to channel water through the Everglades. These marshy rivers are the deepest communities, at about 3 feet in the deepest parts, and remain flooded almost year-round. Moving only 100 feet per day, this stagnant channel of water is the main avenue of water flow in the Everglades. The dominant vegetation includes submerged and floating plants, such as bladderwort, water lily, maiden cane, and spatterdock. In areas where slough communities are plentiful, there are also tree islands and long, elongated patches of sawgrass marsh. Water is channeled from Lake Okeechobee southward around the tree islands. The Everglades ecosystem contains 2 major sloughs, which are principal natural drainages for the freshwater Everglades. Shark River Slough, the river of grass, leads fresh water into tidal rivers in the coastal area of Everglades National Park, and the much smaller Taylor Slough, located in the southeastern corner of the Everglades, a tributary of Shark River Slough, eventually drains into Florida Bay. Sloughs are ideal habitats for aquatic plant and invertebrate species because of the long periods of time that the wetland is covered with water. Many aquatic birds, alligators, and snails also call the slough their home. Broadleaf plants in particular, like the duck potato plant, are vital to this ecosystem because they provide shade and nutrition for grazers, small fish, and insects in what can sometimes be a relatively harsh environment. There are several types of wet prairies, which are different than sloughs. Marl prairies are large areas of freshwater marshes that border the deeper sloughs of the Everglades. These marshes harbor different low-growing vegetation. The freshwater marl prairie occurs on thin calcitric soil, marl, overlying limestone bedrock. It always contains scattered low growth of sawgrass, but has high plant diversity. Periphyton, a complex association of various algae, is conspicuous and is the basis for the marl soils. The marl allows very slow seepage of the water and not rapid drainage. A second type of wet prairie is a deep water marsh community which occurs on peat soil, formed from decomposing plants, and has lower plant diversity. Common throughout the southeastern United States, trees that live in the cypress swamp can survive in standing water. It is common to find cypress trees growing in a dome shape, with larger trees in the middle and smaller trees all around. In areas of less favorable growing conditions, stunted cypress trees, called dwarf cypress, grow thinly distributed in dry soil conditions. Cypress swamps are the most widespread still water swamps in southern Florida, including the Big Cypress Swamp National Preserve, which supplies the Everglades with the majority of its water flow. These ecosystems are suitably named due to their trademark tree, the bald cypress. These trees have very wide bases, knees, that grow from the roots and stick up out of the water. A key characteristic of these trees is their remarkable ability to regrow quickly after fire destruction, which occurs most often when the water level fluctuates dramatically. Cypress swamps exist in areas where depressions in the soil have uncovered the shallow water table. Because of shallow waters and continuously varying water level, flooding occurs frequently. Other trees and shrubs like pond cypress, black gum, red maple, wax myrtle, and buttonwood can be found in cypress swamps. Species of white-tailed deer, minks, raccoons, egrets, herons, alligators, frogs, turtles, and snakes inhabit these areas. Florida Bay is the largest body of water within the Everglades and contains over 800 square miles of marine bottom, much of which is covered by submerged vegetation. Seagrass and algae provide shelter and sustenance to numerous marine organisms, which in turn sustain the food chain that supports all higher vertebrates in the bay. A wide variety of commercially and recreationally important fish, crustaceans, and mollusks thrive within the estuarine environments of the Everglades. Periphyton, a complex association of various algae, is conspicuous and is the basis for the marl soils. Activity 2. Everglades Habitat Matching. Purpose: students will learn different characteristics of each habitat. Time: 30 minutes. Materials: paper, pencil, clipboard. What to do? This activity would be compiled of detailed pictures of each Everglades habitat. Then on the left-hand side of the activity sheet, there will be various different characteristics of each individual habitat, and you will have to match the characteristics to each habitat. Discussion points. To prepare you to think about the habitats of the Everglades, consider the environment where you live. If you live in a city, you are probably surrounded by buildings, parks, and paved streets. What are the physical factors, weather and temperature, that surround you? What are the living things, animals and plants, that surround you? Are there habitats, ponds, forests, etc., that these animals and plants live and survive in? Compare these habitats to the Everglades habitats. Habitats. Hardwood hammocks. Hardwood hammocks are shady, moist, and grow on natural rises of only a few inches off the ground. This type of habitat can be found all over the Everglades ecosystem, mainly in deeper sloughs and marshes. Examples of species that you may find in this area of the Everglades are migratory birds, such as Kirtland's warbler, the gray kingbird. Some birds also nest in these forests, such as the cardinal, red-bellied woodpecker, and the pine warbler. In addition to birds, many other animals rely on tropical hardwood hammocks as an integral part of their habitat. The Florida panther, Florida key deer, Florida mastiff bat, Stock Island tree snail, and Schaus swallowtail butterflies are all endangered species known to this particular habitat. Mangrove. Mangroves are found in the coastal channels and winding rivers at the tip of South Florida. The term mangrove is used to identify several species of salt-tolerant trees that live among the harsh growing conditions of the coast. Did you know there are different types of mangroves? Red mangrove, identified by their tall stilt-like roots and maroon color. Black and white mangrove, thrive in tidal waters where fresh water and salt water mix together in the Everglades. The mangrove estuary system is a valuable nursery for a variety of important marine species. During the dry months, wading birds congregate here to feed and nest. During the summer months, these mangrove forests provide the first line of defense against the howling winds and storm surge of hurricanes. The American crocodile, brown pelican, green sea turtle, manatee, osprey, and the roseate spoonbill, just to name a few, are all commonly found in the mangroves of the Florida Everglades. Pineland, otherwise known as the pine rocklands, are made up of a rugged terrain and is canopied by tall pine trees. The understory is enriched by various groups of flora. Fire is necessary in the pineland habitat. The clearing out of the faster growing hardwoods will help unblock sunlight to allow the pine seedlings to grow. Many of the plants found here are well adapted to a life of frequent fires. The pinelands are home to many interesting species: the diamondback rattlesnake, indigo snake, coral snake, king snake, barred owl, woodpecker, and the black bear. Coastal lowlands. Coastal lowlands are located between the tidal mudflats of Florida Bay and dry land. The coastal lowlands are a mixture of bushy and salt-tolerant vegetation. These areas do not have mangroves, which leads to periodic flooding by hurricanes and heavy winds. Animal life in this zone is dependent upon the amount of water present, but commonly found animals include Cape Sable seaside sparrows, Everglades snailkites, Florida grasshopper sparrows, wood storks, eastern indigo snakes, and small mammals such as rats, mice, and rabbits. Freshwater sloth. Freshwater sloths are low-lying areas of land that serve to channel water through the Everglades. These marshy rivers are relatively deep and remain flooded almost year-round. Although they are the main avenue of water flow in the Everglades, the current remains leisurely, moving around 100 feet per day, which calculates less than 1 mile an hour. It is also dotted with islands of trees. This landscape channels life-giving waters from Lake Okeechobee southward. Freshwater marl prairies. Freshwater marl prairies are large areas of fresh water that border the deeper sloughs of the Everglades. These marshes harbor different low-growing vegetation. Periphyton, a complex association of various algae, is conspicuous and is the basis for the marl soils. The marl allows slow seepage of the water, but not rapid drainage. Though the sawgrass is not as tall and the water is not as deep, freshwater marl prairies look a lot like freshwater sloughs. Freshwater marl prairies are an excellent location for birds. Sloughs in the Everglades attract a great variety of wading birds, such as herons, egrets, roseate spoonbills, ibises, and brown pelicans. Snailkites are home to the marl prairie as well. Snailkites eat apple snails, which in turn feed on the enormous amounts of sawgrass found in this particular habitat. Cypress swamp. Common throughout the southeastern United States, the cypress swamps trees can survive in standing water. In the Florida Everglades, these trees are often found growing in one of 3 distinct formations. It is common to find a cypress tree growing in the shape of a dome, with larger trees in the middle and smaller all around. In areas of less favorable growing conditions, Stunted cypress trees, called dwarf cypress, grow thinly distributed in dry soil conditions. Many interesting and yet beautiful flora can be found in the cypress swamps of the Everglades. Air plants called epiphytes, such as bromeliads, Spanish moss, orchids, and ferns, grow on the branches and trunks of cypress trees. The swamp also features 25 species of orchids. These tall cypress trees provide excellent nesting areas for birds, including wild turkeys, ibis, herons, egrets, and anhingas. Mammals in cypress regions include white-tailed deer, squirrels, raccoons, opossums, skunks, swamp rabbits, river otters, bobcats, as well as a plethora of small rodents. Marine and estuarine. The Florida Bay is the largest body of water within the Everglades, containing over 800 square miles of marine bottom, much of which is covered by submerged vegetation. Seagrass and algae provide shelter and sustenance to numerous marine organisms, which in turn sustain the food chain that support all higher vertebrates in the bay. A wide variety of commercially and recreationally important fish, crustaceans, and mollusks thrive within the estuarine environments of the Everglades. Coral, sponges, and seagrasses serve as shelter and food for these crustaceans and mollusks, which in turn are the primary food source for the larger marine animals like sharks, stingrays, and barracudas. Pelicans, shorebirds, terns, and black skimmers are among the birds that can frequently be spotted on the park shorelines. Activity 3. Identifying producers and consumers. Purpose. Students will identify organisms as either producers or consumers. Time. 30 minutes. Materials: paper, pencil, and clipboard. What to do? Take students outside to a grassy area of school property. Instruct students to write down as many forms of life as they see, include plants and animals. Go back into the classroom, classify each life form as either a producer or consumer. Discussion points. Which did you find more of, producers or consumers? Answer. Producers. There are way more producers than consumers that exist, which is vital to the survival of all life forms. If the ratio were to switch and disrupt the balance by having more consumers than producers, there would not be enough energy sources to support the consumers, which would eventually cause their extinction. Is it possible for something to be both a producer and a consumer? Yes. An example would be the carnivorous plants such as the Venus flytrap, which is capable of carrying out photosynthesis but is also able to consume other food sources, like insects. However, these plants consume insects primarily for the nitrogen content. Since they exist in areas where the soil is very low in nitrogen, most plants get their nitrogen from the soil. What would happen to consumers if the sun didn't exist? If the sun did not exist, all forms of life would fail to exist. All forms of life, plants and animals, depend upon the sun for survival. Producers, plants, require the sun in order to provide energy for themselves. Consumers, animals, depend on the producers, plants, as a food source. The sun has a domino effect on all areas of life. If there were no sun, there would be no plants, and if there were no plants, there would be no animals. Activity 4. Animal Food Pyramid. Purpose. Students will differentiate animals based on what they eat. Time, 30 minutes. Materials: large cutout pyramid shape, markers and pencils. What to do? Assign groups consisting of no more than 4 students. As a group, pick one habitat that exists in nature. Examples: ocean, forest, desert, mountains, farm, grasslands, and rainforest. Brainstorm what plants and animals exist in the chosen ecosystem. Using a pre-cut pyramid shape, create a pyramid for the chosen habitat and write in the organisms in the appropriate part of the triangle. Ask students to make the base of the triangle what all organisms need to survive: sun and water, and draw it. The next biggest tier should contain the producers, plants, followed by the herbivores. Heading up the pyramid, getting smaller, would be the omnivores, then the carnivores, and finally the decomposers. Discussion points. What are the factors necessary for life to survive? Water, sunlight, oxygen, nutrients. What would happen to the rest of the pyramid if one section was taken out? If one section of the pyramid was taken out, the rest of the pyramid would crumble. Every tier of organism is dependent upon by another, so if one were to fall, it would only be a matter of time before the rest followed. How could you tell what something eats by looking at its teeth? Scientists are able to uncover eating habits of prehistoric animals based on the wear and definition in their teeth. They can conclude that an animal was an herbivore if the teeth look more like molars, with hardly any defined jagged edges. The tougher their food source, the sharper shape their teeth will adapt. Activity 5. Forming an Everglades food web. Purpose. This activity will challenge students to put together an Everglades food web, as them portraying the roles of different producers and consumers. Time: 30 to 60 minutes. Materials: pictures of various plants and animals existing in the Everglades, red string and blue string. What to do? Students will be given a sheet of paper face down. On the paper is a picture and name of a particular plant or animal residing in the Everglades. On the instructor's count, students will be asked to flip their paper over and see what organism they've been given. The students then must work together to create a giant food web using each other, representing a food web in the Everglades. The class must keep in mind that to have a successful food web, you need the sun, producers, and consumers. Remember, it is possible that one organism may be consumed by more than one thing. This creates a web, not a chain. Once every student is part of the food web, they will have to fully explain it to the instructor. To make the process more interesting, each participant could hold several pieces of red string and pieces of blue string. The red string represents who you're getting your energy from, who you eat. The blue string represents who is getting their energy from you, who eats you. Each person will have to transfer their different color string from them to their prey and predators, using each color string appropriately. The people representing the sun will only have blue string, since the sun is responsible for providing life. All of the producers will have to take some blue string from the sun. Then the consumers will have to take some blue string from the producers they rely on. An extension of this activity would be to repeat this food web formation, excluding a key participant. The class should notice the difficulty in forming the new web, minus an important character. Discussion points. Can more than one animal eat the same organism? Can that animal be preyed on by more than one predator? Absolutely. What is the difference between a food chain and food web? Why do we consider food webs to be more realistic than food chains. A food chain follows a single path of energy flow. For example, a cricket is eaten by a fish is eaten by a bird. Food webs, however, incorporate all of the factors involved in the survival of life forms in that particular ecosystem. They show the interconnections between the sun, the plants, the animals, and the decomposers that will all contribute to the energy distribution which supports life in that environment. What kinds of problems did you encounter while trying to build your food web, specifically after certain species were left out? It can be difficult to keep in mind all of the relationships between organisms in an ecosystem. Since food webs can sometimes be very extensive, it's a challenge to create one which demonstrates every single possible passage of energy. When a native species is missing, due to any number of factors, it makes it even more difficult to obtain a complete web. Species rely on each other, so when one's taken out, that's a missing link which causes a rippling effect on the rest of the web. Activity 6. Welcome visitors, or not. Purpose. Students will have gained an understanding of the disruption caused in a food web by a species being lost to health or endangerment in the previous activity. Now, we will take a look at the disruption caused by an invasive species entering into the environment. Which is more detrimental to the food web? Time, 30 to 60 minutes. Materials, markers, colored pencils, crayons, poster paper, pencils. Invasive species information. What to do? Using computer or video resources, students will determine some of the most unwanted and unwelcome invaders in the Everglades. Students work in small groups to create a wanted sign for a particular invasive species in the Everglades. They need to include what they're wanted for, where they've been spotted, and why they need to be captured. Examples of invasive species in the Everglades: Burmese python, Cuban tree frogs, giant ram's horn snail, Asian clam, melaleuca tree, Brazilian pepper, and the spectacled caiman. Discussion points. What do you suppose was the purpose of this activity? To gain an understanding as to why non-native species are not welcome visitors to the Everglades ecosystem. What negative impact do invasive species have on the environment? They cause a threat to native species by creating competition for food and habitat. They can damage the environment, spread diseases, and contribute to overall forage loss. They could also alter genetics by generating a lot more hybrid species than purebred species, and could even have an impact on the economy due to damage and/or control costs. Which do you think hurts the food web more? Losing a species to extinction or disease, or adding an invasive species into the mix? Both scenarios are very detrimental to the natural flow and balance of the ecosystem's food web. Either situation would lead to the decline in population of several other species. However, an invasive species causes more problems than just negatively altering the food web.